Well, the cost of love, I think, for me works on two levels. Is the artistic level in the sense of the cost of our love for painting. Because I think going from the actual concept of the painting all the way through to the hang, the number of steps that you have to do to actually achieve this final exhibition is our cost of love of painting. I think that's one level. The other level, of course, is the key theme for the show, which is mythology. And I think splattered through all the Greek myths are the cost of love, especially when you look at all the love stories that happen. And of course, the exhibition is not just about love. It's the cost of love of freedom for Icarus, for example. It's the cost of love of Adonis in The Hunt, for example, and George's quest for the dragon. So I think it's two levels for me, yeah.
We first met through the VAA on an artist networking call, and then I put a call out for people to help me with my sudden cardiac art show. Robert was an artist who responded and committed, and while other artists were disappearing into the ether, he committed to a deadline and actually did the work. So I knew he was someone that I wanted to work with, and I loved his paintings. And then we worked together on sudden cardiac art. We did a group show in Gloucester, and then that was picked up by the Keck School of Medicine in Los Angeles and toured to there. So we've shown together twice in a group context, and we said, wouldn't it be nice, we're both into mythology, thematically we have very similar themes, so why don't we do a joint show and explore the mythology side of our work? And so we found this venue, we got the work together, and here we are.
I had the joy of creating a copy of an Artemisia Gentileschi painting, all with the defibrillator on. Yeah. And flashing red and green lights. Yeah, it was a fun show, it was a good show.
It's quite nice to actually be painting something that doesn't need a defib at the moment. It's like no AED pads in this one, but it was a good show. So this painting is the fire escape, and here, hidden in the background, is the lost dragon. So this dragon is sort of symbolic of the dragon as a couple, and here this dragon has been slain, so its tail is hidden behind the flames, this one, and all of the arrows are coming through, so it's on the ground, and luckily this dragon has been able to escape. So I wanted it to be this view almost like you're above the dragon, like whether you're on the dragon's back or you're watching it from the sky, but this sort of strange perspective where you're looking down on the ground underneath as you're flying with this dragon, and almost to have it so that the slain dragon is almost incidental and you don't notice it's there, and actually that is what the whole painting is about, this separation of the dragons, where suddenly our flying dragon, who is breathing fire and escaping, getting into the wilderness, they're escaping because they're now hunted, their environment's being destroyed, they're running out of space and freedom, and they've also lost all the other dragons. So it becomes, again, focusing on that moment where the dragon goes from being part of something bigger and part of a whole community of dragons and a collection of dragons to being the last dragon that's left, and then pushed into being in a cave, pushed into eating the sheep and then the princesses, and then eventually pushed to its fate where it's made extinct completely when George comes on the scene to rescue the villagers. And it's this very strange feeling for this dragon, because I want it to be that we're thinking about what's happening to this creature, but at the same time the creature is always going to be the enemy of the humans in the story. But it's just looking at it and thinking, well, how has it ended up in this situation where both George and Dragon are on these parallel fates? Neither of them can escape where fate is pulling them. We know how it's going to end, but there's that pathos towards both of the main characters for ending up in a situation where they really have no control over what's happened to them. That is that.
Very good. This is why I think having the story with the painting is just the best thing, because you can have the aesthetic reaction to it, but if you have a layered meaning underneath it, you know, that's why I think having the story on these cards for people to look at and read.
I was really surprised that people didn't notice the dragon, like the second dragon, because it was like that was the first bit I painted, and that was like the most important bit of the painting, and yet most people didn't realise it was there. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? Like without the story, you don't know what people are going to take away from the painting.
And what's going to be the focus of the viewer when they actually see it. Yeah. Very good. So this painting is called Folklore, and it features a model called Andrea Marani, who actually features in 5 other paintings in the exhibition. And I get really inspired from the actual poses from the life models themselves, and they themselves create a story. And this particular one, where he's placing these daisies under his arm, reminded me of the story of Icarus, whose father helped him build his wings to escape to freedom. And I just saw this with the black coat and the downward head is symbolising a moment of remembrance for Icarus. And so, he's placing these daisies thinking about the cost that Icarus himself, against his father's wishes, made when he tried to escape to freedom. So yeah, that's this particular painting. But as I say, the others feature the same model, and I think it provides a coherence to this part of the exhibition. So this painting is Apollo and Daphne, and in the traditional telling of the myth, Apollo is shot with a golden arrow, which makes him fall in love with Daphne, who he pursues to the edge of the river, and she turns into a laurel tree, which is forever used as a symbol for poets and musicians and athletes in terms of crowning glory. But she's been shot with a lead arrow, which makes her repel him. But I wanted to retell it in the sense that the lead arrow had missed hitting Daphne, and what would actually happen, what would her feelings be if he had captured her at the edge of the river. And as the little paean goes that I wrote for it, it's, even the gods waited. So we don't know the outcome in this particular moment, but it's at that conjecture of the decision of whether she succumbs to his longing or she repels it.
This is a magenta dragon guarding the golden fleece. Throughout the series, I want the dragon to be this slightly irreverent character. So some of the paintings are very dark, and some of them it's much more like pop culture, and the dragon is very like cheerful and almost like a comedic figure. And I just got really into this idea of using a super bright palette, and it actually started because I wanted to use an Indian yellow on the fleece, so that it would be really gold. And then I got the Indian yellow and it didn't look bright enough. So I got the cadmium yellow and I layered it, and it was getting brighter and brighter. I'm like, oh, it's starting to feel gold. But then the dragon in green suddenly pulled all of the yellow out of the fleece. So it was this playing around with the palette until I ended up with this very strange like teal and blue and yellow. And the whole thing was to try and make the yellow of the fleece feel as yellow as possible. And then I had this beautiful cobalt violet and this magenta pink, and I just got so into them. And playing around with the palette, it was like the complementary colours, so get the teal, get the cobalts, play them off against each other. So it was really exploring colour, but through this context of the myth of, the golden fleece is hanging up, it's being guarded by a dragon, and then Jason manages to get it and take it off with him. And there's quite a lot of golden things in Greek mythology. So there's the golden apples of Hera, there's the golden fleece, and there are these sort of basilisk style dragons that are guarding them. So I wanted him to feel a bit like he's got the wings in this one, and again to kind of reference that myth, but to really explore the colour. And outside my studio is a massive oak tree. So in a lot of the works, there's the same tree being referenced, and it's actually the tree that's outside the studio. So each one was kind of related to a season where whatever season they were painted in, the tree was in that season.
Right.
So this was in spring, so it's like the very cheerful spring colours.
You said that. Is that the same tree, I take it then?
Yes, that's the same tree.
See.
And that's in autumn, and it's like literally sort of the tree through.
It's a theme in your work, yeah.
And I didn't even, like, you don't even think about it till you realise you're looking out the window painting the tree.
Yeah.
And so although it's all in your subconscious, it's actually so much of what you're observing is going into all the paintings, even though you don't think it's there. So I don't think you can ever get away from that atelier training where it's like, observe, and you think, no, I'm going to do everything from my subconscious, but it still gets you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
On the artist call a few weeks ago, we were saying how basically being an artist is your journey back to your 11-year-old self.
Exactly.
And I was like, that's literally my life.
Yeah, I think as you get older, you definitely revisit your childhood.
Yeah, you do.
I used to watch birds when I was younger, I've got
Yeah.
time to do that now. I used to paint when I was young, I do that now. I think you go back and you go, because you had those beautiful memories, but you didn't necessarily have the time in your career to revisit them.
And I think sometimes you've forgotten it and it's buried. It was one of the things, like, my parents actually said to me, they're like, do you remember when you painted that massive dragon on the wall? And I was like, no. And they're like, still doing the same thing.
Okay, so one of the big events of the summer that I'm looking forward to is Christopher Nolan's Odysseus film, which comes out on the 17th of July, I think. And this painting is Odysseus, who's very well known for his wily character, and the guy that came up with the wooden horse idea and a few other things. But his journey home, his 10-year journey home, will make a fascinating film, sure, in his hands, but I also wanted to sort of pay tribute to his wiliness and his thought. So I've got an image here very much in the style of the thinker, and it's called Cathedrals of the Mind. So you have these rosary windows that represent the cathedral. The idea being it's this big vacuous space in which ideas can be generated, not just for art, but of course for Trojan horses.
So in this cabinet, we've got quite a lot of works that I did about the Andromeda theme, and it started off with an ink drawing. And I wanted to explore this concept of Andromeda. She's the princess chained to the rocks, and this horrible sea monster tries to get her, and then she's rescued. So it's a very similar theme of a woman who is normally a princess or a high status woman who is basically a foil to the hero, in the same way that the monster then becomes a foil to the hero. So without the monster and the princess, the hero can't come in to save the day. But what happens while they are waiting for the hero to come and save them? And I think there's a lot of commonalities between this sort of dragon monster figure and the princess figure, because the princess, generally in these stories, the princess can remain unknown, and she's in the context of the men around her. So she's a princess because her father is the king, and the dragon remains anonymous as well. So they sort of are these nameless characters that have to exist in order for the hero to show that he's a hero. So I started with the ink, and then I created a laser cut on bronzed acrylic. And the acrylics, it's actually discarded signs. So when people make plastic signs, they chuck away huge amounts of the signage. And in the STEAMhouse in Birmingham, they collect the signs. So I had all the acrylic to work on. And I just thought this colour was fantastic. Then I mounted it in this gold to bring out the sort of metallic nature of it. And then I wanted to see how it would work on different scales. So the ink drawing is quite big, actually. It's quite a bit bigger than this. It's probably about this size. And I wanted to see how it would be if it was tiny. So I had some offcuts of MDF, and I then did a very small, very light MDF version, then inverted it for this version. So you're in the cave, and in here it's still quite a light, inviting cave, but then it becomes a darker cave. And then I started thinking about the cave as a repetition and abstracting it more. So this one is black MDF, and then it's been burnt out with the drawing on the background. And then I inserted like little highlights of metallic and little highlights of American walnut.
Wow.
And other MDFs, because I wanted it to feel like the dragon also has a crown. So it's like, is the dragon a princess? Is the dragon a king? Do we even know what this dragon is? We know nothing about this dragon's backstory. They're just this mysterious, monstrous sea creature. And as they go through the abstractions, they start to morph into each other. So by the time we've reached this simplification in Crown, Tiara, Wing, it's almost like the princess and the dragon are the same creature in the same space, waiting for the same person to come onto the scene. So that was what the Andromeda series was all about. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, so this one's called Nothi Soton, which is Greek for know thyself. And it's quite a complex picture, there's lots in it. But essentially you have heaven portrayed at the top, and this black strip at the bottom represents hell. And we have this idea of someone who's revering the Christ figure and the Bible, and someone who's potentially sinning against the Bible, and hence the Christ figure wants to teach this lady about the Bible and its content. But we've got the bloody Christ, we have these angels that are from woodcuts, and it's the idea that, is heaven real, or is it just a woodcut? Is it just an angel? Are these real wings, or are they pretend wings? You know, are they being held up by strings at the top rather than flying angels? And we'll have the message that was made across the sea of Christianity to all these peoples and all these towns across the whole world. And I kind of like the idea of this single person living in this house who's maybe not quite converted. And then most people ask, you know, this about this ruler, and that's my symbol for measuring faith. You know, how do you measure faith? And do we essentially have to believe in a God and the concept of God, or is having a faith enough? But yeah, so that's Nothi Soton.
So this is Guarding Hera's Orchard, and it's looking at the theme of the dragon as a guardian figure in Greek mythology. So there's an idea that the goddess Hera has this beautiful orchard and it's full of golden apples, and so she puts Ladon in to guard it for her, who's a basilisk-style dragon. And then there are these figures called the Hesperides, who there are 7 of them, and these young women who are all identical, who are also guarding the apples. So I wanted it to feel again like the female figure and the dragon figure have this commonality. They're both charged with guarding these apples for Hera. And as I was painting it, the orchard became more dark and it became a nocturnal scene. And I felt, because it was very nebulous and dreamlike, I then went back in with these very strong vertical lines and built up lots and lots of verticals to try and bring in some structure and some sense of the trees without being too literal about them being trees. The figures, it's the same figure repeated at different angles, and I liked the idea of using a lot of the orange so that it was almost like the figures are like the flame of the dragon and the gold of the apple is like the gold of the dragon. And so kind of bringing in those hints and just using a splattering of the yellow to suggest the apples rather than painting them too figuratively. I think it would be nice for people to go away with a sense of curiosity about the paintings and how they were made, and also about the myths themselves, and take inspiration from that, either to create their own myths or to find out more about the myths we've interpreted.
Yeah, I remember as a child sort of reading, picture books. So it was the myths, but the illustrations were so rich with monsters and your head filled in that imaginary world. And I think it would be great to imbue that, not just on any kids that came in, but on the adults that visited, because the Greek myths are so rich. And I also think that they are still very relevant today in terms of, we talked about the cost of life earlier, but they're still relevant today in terms of people's own contemporary lives. So to read them, that's a reason that they've been passed down in oral history, I think, because the reason is they're so rich and they're so educational for people. But yeah, I'd like for folks to enjoy the images for their own aesthetic purposes as well. but for the history that they hold, I think that's the excitement for me. That's the inspiration behind actually doing the paintings in the first place.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's very easy to almost be so familiar with a story that you no longer recognise it as a story. And sometimes when you look at it afresh, when you see a new interpretation of it, you think, oh, this is telling me more about life than I considered, especially with the familiar stories like Icarus, where we've maybe heard it as a child and then you just think, oh, we flew too close to the sun. But then when you look at it and you think, this is really a commentary on folly and pride and not listening to your elders, and there's lots of nuance in it that I think the first time you hear it as a child you don't get, but when you revisit it as an adult you suddenly realise why you were told that story.
Yeah, and in the same way that we've reacted to the myths again in a recent reading of them to create these paintings. You know, they speak differently to every time you read them. I think they speak different things to you.
Yeah.